It was a cold and stormy night, and Emily, a young woman in her mid-20s, found herself alone in her old, creaky, Victorian-style house. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and causing the ancient oak trees in her backyard to scrape against the glass. She was supposed to be alone, but she had an unsettling feeling that she wasn't. Earlier in the day, Emily had been running errands, and when she returned home, she noticed a chilling detail. The front door, which she had locked securely, was now slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she cautiously stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, save for the constant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. As she moved further into the dimly lit living room, she saw that some of her personal items were out of place. A family portrait had been turned upside down, and the antique porcelain dolls on the shelf seemed to be staring at her with malevolent intent. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Fear gnawed at her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the house with her. She picked up her phone, but to her horror, there was no signal. Panic set in as she realized that she had no way to call for help. She thought about running outside, but the relentless storm made that an equally terrifying prospect. Emily decided to investigate the source of her unease, so she grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel and began to search the house. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to echo like a death knell. She moved up the winding staircase, one step at a time, her breath hitching with every footfall. At the top of the stairs, she noticed the door to the attic was open. She had never ventured up there before, and the darkness that emanated from the attic sent shivers down her spine. With her trembling hand, she slowly pushed the door open, and a gust of icy air rushed over her. The attic was filled with forgotten relics and antique furniture draped in dusty sheets. Emily's heart sank when she saw a pair of cold, malevolent eyes glinting in the dim light. She gasped and backed away as a ghastly figure began to materialize. It was a spectral figure, dressed in old, tattered clothing, its face twisted into a grotesque mask of agony. The apparition reached out for her, and Emily, terrified beyond belief, stumbled back and fell down the attic stairs, her screams echoing through the house. She managed to scramble to her feet and ran for the front door. The storm had worsened, rain lashing against her face as she ran out into the night. With nowhere else to go, she took refuge in a nearby neighbor's house, where she called the police. When they arrived, they searched her home but found no sign of the intruder. Her story left them baffled, but they offered her comfort and assured her that they would keep an eye on her property. That night, as Emily tried to sleep in the safety of her neighbor's home, she couldn't help but wonder about the ghostly figure in her attic. Was it a tormented spirit, a malevolent force, or something else entirely? To this day, she shudders at the memory of that night, and Lisa, a young woman in her late 20s, was spending the weekend alone in her cozy suburban home. Her husband was away on a business trip, and she thought a peaceful night alone would be a welcome break from her hectic life. Little did she know that her solitude would turn into a living nightmare. As the night deepened, Lisa was engrossed in a book in the dimly lit living room. The soft glow of the table lamp was her only source of light, casting eerie shadows across the walls. She suddenly heard a faint sound from upstairs, like the floorboards creaking under someone's weight. Her heart raced as she realized she was supposed to be the only one in the house. She hesitated for a moment, thinking it might be her imagination. But when she heard it again, she knew she wasn't alone. Panic set in, and she quietly crept to the kitchen to grab a knife, her trembling hand clutching it tightly. With her heart pounding, she started to investigate the source of the mysterious noise. As she climbed the stairs, each step seemed to echo loudly in the silent house. The hallway upstairs was barely illuminated by the dim nightlight, casting long, sinister shadows that danced along the walls. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Lisa entered her bedroom cautiously, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. Nothing seemed out of place, and she started to convince herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. She was about to return to her book when she heard a chilling whisper right behind her. "Lisa, I've been watching you." She froze, the blood draining from her face. Slowly turning around, her eyes widened in terror as she saw a masked figure emerging from the closet, a deranged grin beneath the mask. Her scream was cut short as the intruder lunged at her, but she managed to swing the knife in her hand, barely scratching the assailant. Terrified, Lisa made a run for the front door, her heart racing and adrenaline pumping through her veins. She managed to get outside and ran to the nearest neighbor's house, desperately pounding on the door until they opened. The police were called, and they searched her home, but the stalker had vanished without a trace. Lisa's husband rushed back, and they decided to stay with friends until the police could apprehend the intruder. The terror of that night continued to haunt Lisa. She couldn't shake the feeling that the stalker had been watching her for a long time, lurking in the shadows, and that they might return. From that day forward, the once beloved home became a house of nightmares, and Lisa could never truly feel safe again. Amber, a young woman in her mid-20s, lived in a quaint cottage nestled deep in the woods. Her home was a remote sanctuary, a place where she could escape the chaos of city life. She often spent weekends alone, reveling in the peace and serenity of the forest that surrounded her. One fateful Friday evening, Amber's boyfriend, James, left for a weekend business trip. She waved goodbye as he drove away, a bittersweet mix of longing and anticipation filling her heart. Amber had been looking forward to this weekend alone, her plan to unwind, read her favorite novels, and immerse herself in the tranquility of her surroundings. The evening arrived, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cottage in deep shadows. Amber cozied up by the fireplace, the crackling flames providing a soothing background to her novel. She was lost in the pages when she first noticed it, a faint rustling outside, almost too subtle to register. Setting her book aside, Amber strained her ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It wasn't unusual to hear animals in the woods, but this felt different, more deliberate. Anxiety gnawed at her as she realized the rustling was drawing closer. The night was moonless, and the cottage's isolation made her feel vulnerable. She approached the window cautiously, peeking through the curtains. The dark forest was impenetrable, and she could see nothing but a wall of trees. Her imagination played tricks on her, attributing every sound to an unseen threat. Resolving to put her fears aside, Amber returned to her book, the presence outside forgotten, but the tension lingered in her chest like an unsettling premonition. As the night wore on, Amber's unease grew. She tried to shake off the sense of foreboding, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. She decided to head upstairs to her bedroom, thinking a good night's sleep would help dispel her irrational fears. Amber lay in her bed, the room bathed in darkness, save for the soft glow of the nightlight. She closed her eyes, trying to find solace in the tranquility of the forest outside. But just as she started to drift off, she heard a voice, a soft, whispering voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "Amber!" The voice called her name, soft and eerie, as if carried by the wind. Startled, she sat up in bed, her heart racing. Her initial reaction was to dismiss it as a trick of her imagination, but the voice persisted, seeming to come from just outside her window. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice quivering. There was no response, but the voice continued to whisper her name, now sounding like a chilling refrain. Amber, her curiosity mingled with fear, crawled to the window and peered out. The night was blanketed in a heavy silence. The forest stood still, and there was no sign of anyone or anything. Trembling, she considered waking up her neighbor, but the thought of admitting her fear to someone else held her back. The whispering voice grew more insistent, urging her to come outside, to join it in the shadows. Her instincts screamed at her to stay inside, to lock the doors and windows, but an unnatural compulsion gnawed at her willpower. She felt herself drawn to the window, her hand trembling as it reached for the latch. With a surge of will, she tore herself away from the window, fleeing to her phone. She called her neighbor, Mark, her voice quivering as she told him about the eerie voice outside. Mark assured her he would come over immediately. Mark finally arrived, and she explained it all. He reassured her she was safe and put her to bed. As the hours passed, Amber began to feel a semblance of safety. Mark's presence offered a reassuring buffer against her fears. She even allowed herself to believe that the inexplicable episode was over. But the night was far from finished with its horrors. Around 3 a.m., Amber woke to a sense of utter dread. Mark was cut up half dead trying to call her. It seemed like he was saying, "Watch out," and then...